Imagine waking up in this house. No neighbors, no roads, no city. Nothing but ocean, wind, and thousands of birds. And the strangest part? Nobody lives here. But someone built this house on one of the most isolated islands in Iceland. Why? And when you discover who used it, the story becomes even stranger. This is the story of the world's loneliest house. Elliðaey is a small island in the Westman Islands, off the southern coast of Iceland. Today, there are no permanent residents living on the island, but look closely at the landscape, because this place is not empty. The island is full of life, especially during the nesting season, when puffins return to its cliffs and grassy slopes. And that tiny bird is one of the biggest reasons humans kept coming back to this island. For generations, puffin hunting was part of the local culture of the Westman Islands. So when you look at that white house, you are not looking at a normal home. You are looking at a hunting lodge, and that changes the entire story, because suddenly, the question is no longer, why would someone want to live here? It becomes, why was this place important enough for people to keep coming back? And to understand that, we have to go back before the famous White House even existed. But this island wasn't always empty. Before the house, there were people. Historical accounts and popular local histories describe people living on Elliðaey in the past, making a living through activities such as fishing, farming, and bird hunting. The exact details of the old settlement are not completely clear today, but we do know something important. This island was not always silent. Imagine living here before modern technology. No internet, no cars, no supermarket, no easy trip back to the mainland. Your world would be this island and the sea around it. You would know the weather, you would know the cliffs, you would know where the birds nested, you would know when the sea was safe and when it was not. But slowly, life on the island became harder to maintain. Better opportunities were available on the mainland, and eventually, the permanent residents left. By around the 1930s, Elliðaey had become uninhabited. And you might think, so that's it. People left. The island became empty. The story ended. But it didn't. Because about 2 decades later, someone came back. And this time, they built a house. In 1953, the Elliðaey Hunting Association built the White Lodge that stands on the island today. It was not built as a luxury home. It was not built for a celebrity. It was not a secret survival bunker. It was built as a place for people connected with hunting on the island, especially puffin hunting. And suddenly, the lonely house makes sense. The island had something people wanted. Puffins. The birds returned. The hunters returned. And the empty island was no longer completely forgotten. Think about how strange that is. The permanent residents had left because living there was too difficult, but other people still had a reason to return. Not to live there forever, just to stay for a while, do what they came to do, and then leave again. The house was never really about escaping civilization. It was about returning to the island for a purpose, and that small difference changes everything, because when you look at the house from far away, it looks lonely, but perhaps it was never built for loneliness. It was built for people who already knew why they were there. But then, the internet found the house, and the story changed. One photograph of a tiny white building on a huge green island was enough to make people curious. And soon, the questions started. Who owns it? Who lives there? Why would anyone build a house in the middle of the ocean? And then came the rumors. One story claimed that the house belonged to Icelandic singer Björk. Another suggested that a billionaire built it as a private retreat. Other versions turned it into a survival shelter, a place to hide from some future disaster. It sounds like the perfect internet mystery. But there is one problem. The real history is much simpler. The building was constructed by the Elliðaey Hunting Association in 1953. It is a hunting lodge. Not a billionaire's bunker, not Björk's secret house, and not an isolated celebrity mansion. But here is where the story becomes interesting again, because even after we remove all the myths, we are still left with one strange question. Why did people care enough about this tiny island to keep coming back? And the answer takes us to the birds. Imagine being one of the people who came here. The sea is below you, the wind is hitting your face, there are no city lights, no traffic, no sounds from a busy street, only the island, the ocean, and birds flying above you. For modern people, this might look like a dream, but for the people connected to this island, it was part of life. Puffin hunting was not simply a strange activity happening in a random place. It was connected to the traditions and food culture of communities in the Westman Islands. People knew these cliffs, they knew these birds, they knew how to move across this difficult landscape, and that is something we often miss when we look at remote places. We see a photograph, and we see loneliness. But the people who came here may have seen something completely different. They saw home. Maybe not a comfortable home, maybe not an easy home, but a place they understood, a place connected to their families, their traditions, and their memories. And perhaps that is why this island feels different, because it was not always a place where nobody belonged. People belonged here once. They built lives here. Then life changed, and they moved on. But some traditions kept bringing people back. Now, here are some things that make Elliðaey even stranger. First, the famous building is not a normal permanent house. It is a hunting lodge. So the millions of people who have seen the photograph have been looking at a building that was never designed for ordinary everyday life. Second, the island itself is tiny. From the mainland, it can look almost unreal, like someone placed a miniature house on a giant piece of grass. But that tiny landscape can become extremely difficult when the weather changes. The North Atlantic does not care how beautiful a place looks. Third, puffins are a major part of Elliðaey's story. The island's bird life helped keep humans connected to it long after permanent settlement had ended. And here's another strange detail. There is also another small structure on the island, associated with storage and other activities. So the White House is not the entire story. There are traces of people, even though there is no town, no street, no neighborhood, just a few signs that humans came here, did something, and left. And that brings us to the strangest thought of all. What does it actually feel like to be inside that house? Imagine you finally arrive. You climb up the island. You reach the little white house. You open the door. And then, silence. No traffic, no voices from the next apartment, no sounds from a city, just wind, the ocean, and birds. At first, it might feel peaceful, but after an hour, would you still feel peaceful? After 6 hours? After one night? Would the silence become beautiful? Or would it become frightening? And if something went wrong, how quickly could you leave? These are the questions that a photograph cannot answer. We know the history. We know why the lodge was built. We know the internet myths are not the real story. But we still cannot completely understand what it feels like to be alone there. And maybe that is why this little building became so famous. Not because it is truly the world's loneliest house, but because it makes us imagine loneliness. It makes us ask, could I live there? Would I enjoy being alone? Or would I miss the world? And suddenly, this isn't really a story about Iceland anymore. It is a story about us. The people who once lived on Elliðaey eventually left. The island remained. Then hunters returned. The lodge was built. And decades later, people around the world began looking at that same building through a screen. A place that once had practical meaning became a mystery. A place connected to tradition became an internet legend, and a building designed for people who came and went became known as the world's loneliest house. But maybe There is another way to look at it. We often think that being alone means something is wrong, that if everyone else is moving forward and we are standing by ourselves, we must be falling behind. But Elliðaey tells us something different. People can leave a place and still carry its memories. A chapter can end without meaning the whole story is over. And sometimes, a place that looks empty is actually full of stories. So if you ever feel like you're standing alone, like nobody sees your effort, like your life is moving slower than everyone else's, remember this little house. It has stood there for decades, through wind, storms, silence, and change. And it is still there. Still standing, still part of a story. Maybe you are like that too. Maybe this chapter of your life feels lonely. Maybe you don't know where it is taking you, but that doesn't mean nothing is happening. Sometimes, the quietest chapters are preparing us for the next one. So don't be afraid of the empty space. Don't be afraid of starting again. And don't think your story is over just because nobody can see what you're building yet. Because every place has a story. Every person has a story. And sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the loneliest places. Every morning is another chance to begin again. This is RiRa Light, and I'll see you in the next story.